Let's bring the focus closer to home, though, these quite disruptive protests in Sydney.
Yes, we saw these crazy scenes in Sydney this morning, Kieran, with this Blockade Australia protest and 11 arrests. This stuff has been bubbling away for a while in Sydney, and it culminated today with traffic on the Harbour Bridge being blocked by a young woman, leading to these scenes.
The colony of Australia, this destructive, violent system landed here, hell-bent on spreading extractive processes all throughout this continent, ripping out of the soil, out of the earth. I'm not sure what's about to happen.
You everyone stay up! You need to hop out of the car. And there we go. So there's one bike chain locking onto the steering wheel around the driver's neck. Have you got any identification on you?
Well, there's a line between protest and criminality at times. This woman, who's 22, is risking 2 years jail and a $20,000 fine. She is on about climate change. I know she has a rental car which appears to be powered by petrol, not an electric car. And New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet has put in these penalties with the potential for 2 years jail, so the whole city does not get shut down by these kind of actions. Police are being proactive too, I am told, making raids on Blockade Australia, having police in place in various parts of the city ready to act on the protests. Some of these young people need to be very careful they don't end up in jail, because at one point or another a magistrate will make an example of one of them. And that's already happened in terms of one 26-year-old earlier this year being jailed for 4 months for scaling a crane at Port Botany. There is a history of peaceful protests on issues like apartheid, etc. in this country, but this particular cause seems a bit puzzling when you consider the current federal government is lifting its ambitions on climate change. Incidentally, and speaking of that, Climate Change and Energy Minister Chris Bowen released the new greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the quarter, which found that Australia's greenhouse gas emissions are now at 21.4% below June 2005 levels, the baseline year for the Paris Agreement. Australia agreed to 26 to 28% less than 2005 levels by 2030. Under Tony Abbott, that policy carried through to Scott Morrison. Anthony Albanese in recent weeks has now committed to his election pledge of 43% less emissions by 2030. In a statement, Mr Bowen said, in the year to the end of December 2021, emissions were 488 million tonnes, 0.8% or 4.1 million tonnes higher than the same period in 2020. We know that in the absence of climate policy, the Liberals and Nationals relied on COVID and drought to bank emissions reductions. He goes on to say national electricity market emissions from electricity generation continued their long-term structural decline over the past year, down 4.2% or 7 million tonnes, but said this is not the case for the whole economy, Kieran.